La respuesta estadounidense no nació en un gabinete elegante. Nació en el olor a combustible quemado. En las manos temblando de quienes buscaban amigos entre metal retorcido. En los hospitals linos. En los oficiales cantando perdidas mientras el humo todavía subía. En los marineros mirando barcos que, pocas horas antes, parecían imposibles de derribar. Pearl Harbor fue un ataque contra máquinas, sí, pero el efecto real fue contra el alma de un país entero. Hasta aquel domingo, muchos estadounidenses miraban la Segunda Guerra como una tormenta distante, terrible, aterradora, pero distante. Algo de los periódicos, de las radios, de Londres, Moscú, China y el Atlántico. Después de Pearl Harbor, la guerra dejó de ser noticia. Se convirtió en visita. Entró por la puerta. Se sentó en la mesa y dijo, ahora estás dentro. El ataque que debía quebrar la voluntad estadounidense hizo lo contrario. Transformó la duda en furia. Transformó el aislamiento en movilización. Transformó fábricas, familias, soldados, pilotos y trabajadores en países de una máquina gigantesca. Porque un barco hundido puede ser reemplazado. Pero una nación humilada, cuando decide responder, se convierte en otra cosa. En los meses siguientes, Estados Unidos empezó a moverse a una velocidad aterradora. Los estiros aceleraron la producción. Las industrias cambiaron de función. Lo cotidiano empezó a ceder espacio a aviones, barcos, municiones y equipos. Era como si el país entero hubiera escuchado la explosión del Arizona y respondiera con martillos, acero y turnos dobles. Pero antes de la venganza a escala industrial, luego algo más pequeño, simbólico, casi imposible. Los estadounidenses necesitaban demostrar que todavía podían alcanzar Japón. No ganar la guerra de un solo golpe. No destruirlo todo. Solo probar una cosa. Ustedes tocaron Pearl Harbor, pero no son intocables. De ahí nació el ataque Doolittle. Bombarderos estadounidenses despegaron desde un portaaviones para alcanzar territorio japonés. El daño militar fue limitado, pero el impacto emocional fue enorme. Para los estadounidenses, el mensaje era claro. Seguimos vivos. Pero Japón estaba lejos de ser débil. Muy lejos. En los primeros meses, sus fuerzas avanzaron por el Pacífico con una velocidad brutal. Tomaron territorios, derribaron defensas y crearon la sensación de que el mapa estaba siendo redibujado cada semana. Pearl Harbor parecía solo el primer trueno de una tormenta enorme. Y entonces llegó la pregunta. ¿Si Japón había logrado hacer eso en Hawái? ¿Hasta dónde podría llegar? El miedo era real. Pero el miedo, cuando se mezcla con rabia y propósito, puede convertirse en combustible. Y eso fue lo que ocurrió. La guerra en el Pacífico se convirtió en una secuencia de islas, océanos, pistas de aterrizaje, calor sofocante y battles donde cada metro parecía cobrar un precio absurdo. No era solo una disputa por territorio. Era una guerra de alcance, resistencia y voluntad. Y en el centro de todo estaba la memoria de aquel domingo. Pearl Harbor se volvió más que una base atacada. Se volvió herida. Se volvió promesa. Se volvió una frase silenciosa repetida en cada avance. Esto comenzó allí. Pero tal vez el giro más importante llegó con una ironía que la historia guardó en el bolsillo. Los barcos más simbólicos alcanzados en Pearl Harbor eran acrazados. Gigantes de acero que representaban la vieja idea del poder naval. Pero la guerra que nacería de allí sería decidida, en gran parte, por los portaaviones. Y los principales portaaviones estadounidenses no estaban en el puerto aquel día. Y esa ausencia cambió el futuro. Japón golpeó con fuerza, pero no arrancó la paisa que más importaría después. Meses más tarde, en Midway esa diferencia apareció. Allí, la marina japonesa perdería portaaviones vitales. Ali, el impulso Japón Siria quebrado. Ali, la guerra en el Pacífico empezaría a cambiar de dirección. Pearl Harbor fue el golpe. Midway fue el momento en que el brazo que dio ese golpe empezó a temblar. Pero nada de eso borra lo que ocurrió aquella mañana. No se puede transformar Pearl Harbor solo en el preludio de una victoria. Hacer eso sería injusto con quienes vivieron el ataque en tierra. En la cubierta, dentro de los pasillos oscuros de los barcos y en las pistas destruidas. Para quien estuvo Ali, Pearl Harbor no era símbolo. Era sonido, era metal partiéndose, era agua entrando, era humo cubriendo el sol, era la sensación de buscar a alguien y no encontrarlo. Y por eso esta historia todavía conmueve tanto, porque junta vulnerabilidad y potencia. Un país enorme fue tomado por sorpresa. Una flota entera fue herida frente al mundo. Pero de aquel trauma nació una reacción que cambiaría el rumbo de la Segunda Guerra. Pero existe una lección incómoda aquí. Pearl Harbor no enseña solamente que los ataques sorpresas son peligrosos. Enseña que las certezas cómodas pueden ser mortales. Las señales estaban esparcidas. El submarino detectado. El radar avisando. La tensión diplomática aumentando. Salas parecen poco. Juntas formaban un debujo claro. El problema es que mucha gente solo ve el debujo después de que sangra. La tragedia no vino de un solo error. Un atraso aquí. Una interpretación equivocada a la. Un exceso de confianza. Una amenaza considerada improbable. Hasta que dejó de serlo. Aquella mañana, Japón creyó que podría quebrar la flota estadounidense y ganar espacio para construir su imperio en el Pacífico. Por algunas horas, parecía que el plan había funcionado. Pero la historia no terminó aquel domingo. En realidad para Japón, tal vez Ali comenzó el error más caro. Porque atacar Pearl Harbor no sacó a Estados Unidos de la guerra. Metió a Estados Unidos dentro de ella con una fuerza que antes no existía. ¿Cuántas tragedias de la historia comenzaron así? Con alguien mirando señales claras y diciendo, no debe ser nada. Al final, Pearl Harbor no fue solo la historia de un ataque sufrido por Estados Unidos. Fue la historia de una herida que se convirtió en motor, de una humiliación que se convirtió en decisión, de una mañana que arrancó a un país de la duda y empujó al planeta hacia una nueva fase de la guerra. Pearl Harbor ardió durante algunas horas, pero el eco de aquel fuego atravesó el mundo entero. YSIT gusto esta historia y te hizo ver Pearl Harbor de otra manera. Suscribe y dale gusta al video, porque la próxima historia puede ser todavía más grande. Muchas gracias por ver. Un abrazo. Inside the Arizona, the world turned into night in a matter of seconds. It was not just smoke. It was a darkness with weight. Men pounded on doors twisted by heat. Others tried to climb tilted stairways while the ship groaned from the inside. From the outside, anyone looking at the deck saw a scene impossible to accept. The USS Arizona had been hit by a bomb that pierced through the ship and exploded near the ammunition magazine. The column of fire rose with such violence that that symbol of strength stopped looking like a machine built by men and became a volcano trapped in the water. And the cruelest part is that many people did not even have time to understand. 1 minute before it was Sunday. 1 minute later it was hell. Pearl Harbor was not made only of explosions. It was made of seconds in which ordinary people had to decide whether to run, whether to go back, whether to save someone, or whether to accept that maybe they would not get out of there. There were sailors trying to open flooded compartments. There were men diving into water covered in oil. There were people hearing knocks from inside the metal. Imagine hearing someone trapped behind a wall of steel. You do not see the face. You do not know the name. You only hear pounding. 1, 2, 3. A plea for life turned into sound. And you know time is running out. That is the part that almost never fits into the quick phrases about Pearl Harbor. History usually becomes numbers. Planes, ships, dead, minutes. But a number does not scream. A number does not feel the heat of metal burning the skin. In that harbor, each ship became its own separate story of fear. The Oklahoma was hit by torpedoes and began to roll over. It did not simply sink, capsized. The men inside lost the floor, then the wall, then any sense of direction. The world turned. The light disappeared. The water came in. And while all of that was happening, outside there were still planes passing overhead. There were still bombs. There was still gunfire. The entire base was trying to wake up to a war that had already arrived without knocking on the door. At the airfields, many American planes were lined up wing to wing. The idea was to prevent sabotage. It made sense against a different kind of fear. Commanders were worried about infiltrations and damage done on the ground, so they concentrated the aircraft. But when the attack came from the sky, that organization became a tray served to the enemy. The Japanese planes found perfect rows of targets. They strafed runways, destroyed aircraft before they could take off, turned hangars into bonfires. American pilots ran, trying to reach their machines, but many of them were already in flames. And then you realize something bitter. Pearl Harbor was a surprise, yes, but it was not magic. It was planning on one side and overconfidence on the other. It was Japanese radio silence, unlikely routes, and torpedoes adapted for shallow waters. And it was also the American belief that no one would dare cross the Pacific and attack there. But history loves punishing those who confuse unlikely with impossible. While the first wave was destroying ships and planes, a second Japanese wave was already on its way. When many people began to understand what was happening, the attack still was not over. It was not a scare. It was a strike planned in layers. The second wave came to finish the job. More bombs fell. More runways were attacked. More smoke rose. The blue Hawaiian sky became a dirty ceiling of ash. But in the middle of the chaos, something began to change. Shock became reaction. Men awakened by explosions began taking positions at guns. Some fired without shirts. Others without helmets. Some did not even know exactly where the enemy was coming from, but they fired anyway, because standing still meant accepting death with folded arms. Pearl Harbor was a military defeat, but it was not a scene of cowardice. The base was caught off guard, wounded, crushed in the first minutes. Even so, the response was born inside the chaos itself. People ran to combat stations. Medical teams improvised care. Sailors returned to burning ships to look for survivors. You need to imagine that kind of courage. It is not clean, beautiful courage with music in the background. It is courage dirty with oil, blood, smoke, and fear. The courage of someone terrified who keeps walking because someone else depends on him. While Pearl Harbor burned, in Washington, the news began to spread like poison entering the bloodstream. An attack in Hawaii by Japanese aviation on a Sunday, it seemed too absurd to be real. But reality did not ask permission. When the reports arrived, shock turned into anger, and anger turned into something more dangerous: unity. Until that day, the United States was divided over whether or not to enter the war. Many people wanted distance. The ocean seemed like protection. Pearl Harbor ended that illusion in one morning. The attack did something Japan may not have fully calculated. It did not only damage ships. It pulled the United States out of the stands and threw the entire country onto the battlefield. From one day to the next, doubt became decision. The next day, Franklin D. Roosevelt spoke before Congress and called December 7th a date that would live in infamy. It was not just politics. It was mourning transformed into direction. But here there is a gigantic irony. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor to buy time, and it did. But it bought only a little time and purchased an immense enemy. The American aircraft carriers were not in the harbor. That would change everything. The Japanese destroyed battleships, planes, and installations, but they did not break the future heart of naval warfare. After the Japanese planes left, Pearl Harbor did not return to normal. There is no normal after seeing the sea on fire. The wreckage remained. The bodies, the names being searched for, tilted ships, rising smoke, twisted metal, and people walking without knowing exactly where to go. And maybe that is the hardest part to face. For the world, Pearl Harbor became a beginning. For many people there, it was an ending. The end of an ordinary morning. The end of a sense of safety. The end of a life before the war. Pearl Harbor had been devastated, but not paralyzed forever. The American response was not born in a beautiful office. It was born in the smell of burning fuel, in the trembling hands of those searching for friends among twisted metal, in crowded hospitals, in officers counting losses while the smoke was still rising, in sailors looking at ships that, just a few hours earlier, had seemed impossible to bring down. Pearl Harbor was an attack against machines, yes, but the real effect was against the soul of an entire country. Until that Sunday, many Americans looked at World War II as a distant storm. Terrible, frightening, but distant. Something from newspapers, radios, London, Moscow, China, and the Atlantic. After Pearl Harbor, the war stopped being news. It became a visitor. It walked through the door, sat at the table, and said, "Now you are inside." The attack that was supposed to break American will did the opposite. Turned doubt into fury. Turned isolation into mobilization. It turned factories, families, soldiers, pilots, and workers into pieces of a gigantic machine. Because a sunken ship can be replaced, but a humiliated nation, when it decides to answer, becomes something else. In the following months, the United States began moving at a frightening speed. Shipyards accelerated production. Industries changed their purpose. Everyday life began making room for planes, ships, ammunition, and equipment. It was as if the entire country had heard the explosion of the Arizona and answered with hammers, steel, and double shifts. But before revenge came on an industrial scale, something smaller arrived. Something symbolic, almost impossible. The Americans needed to show they could still reach Japan. Not win the war in a single blow. Not destroy everything. Just prove one thing: you touched Pearl Harbor, but you are not untouchable. That was how the Doolittle raid was born. American bombers took off from an aircraft carrier to strike Japanese territory. The military damage was limited, but the emotional impact was enormous. For the Americans, the message was clear: we are still alive. But Japan was far from weak. Very far. In the first months, its forces advanced across the Pacific with brutal speed. They took territories, crushed defenses, and created the feeling that the map was being redrawn every week. Pearl Harbor seemed like only the first thunderclap of a huge storm. And then came the question: if Japan had managed to do that in Hawaii, how far could it go? The fear was real. But fear, when mixed with anger and purpose, can become fuel. And that is what happened. The war in the Pacific became a sequence of islands, oceans, airstrips, suffocating heat, and battles where every yard seemed to demand an absurd price. It was not just a dispute over territory. It was a war of reach, resistance, and will. And at the center of everything was the memory of that Sunday. Pearl Harbor became more than an attacked base. It became a wound. It became a promise. It became a silent phrase repeated with every advance. This began there. But maybe the most important turn came with an irony history kept in its pocket. The most symbolic ships hit at Pearl Harbor were battleships, steel giants that represented the old idea of naval power. But the war born from that moment would be decided in large part by aircraft carriers. And the main American aircraft carriers were not in the harbor that day. That absence changed the future. Japan struck hard, but it did not tear away the peace that would matter most later. Months afterward, at Midway, that difference appeared. There, the Japanese Navy would lose vital aircraft carriers. There, Japanese momentum would be broken. There, the war in the Pacific would begin to change direction. Pearl Harbor was the punch. Midway was the moment when the arm that threw that punch began to tremble. But none of that erases what happened that morning. You cannot turn Pearl Harbor only into the prelude to victory. Doing that would be unfair to those who lived through the attack on the ground, on the deck, inside the dark corridors of the ships, and on the destroyed airfields. For those who were there, Pearl Harbor was not a symbol. It was sound. It was metal breaking apart. It was water coming in. It was smoke covering the sun. It was the feeling of looking for someone and not finding them. And that is why the story still hits so hard. Because it brings together vulnerability and power. A huge country was caught off guard. An entire fleet was wounded in front of the world. But from that trauma came a reaction that would change the course of World War II. But there is an uncomfortable lesson here. Pearl Harbor does not only teach that surprise attacks are dangerous. It teaches that comfortable certainties can be deadly. The signs were scattered everywhere. The submarine detected, the radar warning, the diplomatic tension rising. Alone, they seemed small. Together, they formed a clear picture. The problem is that many people only see the picture after it bleeds. The tragedy did not come from one single mistake. A delay here, a wrong interpretation there, too much confidence, a threat considered unlikely, until it was not. That morning, Japan believed it could break the American fleet and gain room to build its empire in the Pacific. For a few hours, it seemed like the plan had worked. But history did not end that Sunday. In fact, for Japan, maybe that was where the costliest mistake began. Because attacking Pearl Harbor did not keep the United States out of the war. It brought the United States into it with a force that had not existed before. How many tragedies in history began like this? With someone looking at clear signs and saying, "It is probably nothing." In the end, Pearl Harbor was not only the story of an attack suffered by the United States. It was the story of a wound that became an engine, of a humiliation that became a decision, of a morning that pulled a country out of doubt and pushed the planet into a new phase of the war. Pearl Harbor burned for a few hours, but the echo of that fire crossed the entire world. And if you enjoyed this story and it made you see Pearl Harbor in a different way, subscribe and like the video, because the next story may be even bigger. Thank you so much for watching. A hug.